In this demonstration, we'll be zooming into CloudAppSecurity. CloudAppSecurity is found in another portal, which is portal.cloudappsecurity.com. Now, CloudAppSecurity is where you can find information on not only what applications are being used inside your organization. We can also go in and, for example, check what kind of files have been used and by who. So, to get started with this, first we need to know where CloudAppSecurity gets its data from. Now, in order to get data into CloudAppSecurity, there's many different connectors that you could be using. In the end, when CloudAppSecurity receives data, it's being stored in a very large database environment called Log Analytics, which is a part of Azure. Now, CloudAppSecurity can get its settings from different applications as well as on-premises devices such as firewalls. In order to get access to where CloudAppSecurity gets its data from, you could go into the settings environment, and then you could see that there's different sources that we can go and get our data from. One of them is by using application connectors. Application connectors in my environment, I have set up two. One of them is Office 365 and another one is Microsoft Azure. If you need more application-based connectors to be connected to CloudAppSecurity, you could go and click the plus, and then you could see where you get your data from. You can even get data from Amazon Web Services or, for example, the Google Cloud Platform, as well as Salesforce, Google Suite, Cisco WebEx, Box and Dropbox, just to name a few. Now, once you have connected, for example, Office 365, you can also zoom into where Office 365 is being used inside the organization. So you can see information about the users that are using this and the activity that we have. Also, we see that there's extra information about the application and the accounts that are using all this and what is inside of Office 365. Now, in order to get, but this is already the use of CloudAppSecurity. Another connector for applications is Microsoft Azure, which is the cloud computing platform. You can see again who is using it and where from. You can actually see where users are using this application from. Now, to get back to where we can get our data from, another example is the log collectors. If you want to get extra information, you could set up your log collectors. I already configured my Windows 10 Defender Advanced Threat Protection to be part of one of the sources for CloudAppSecurity. Now you can add data sources by, for example, selecting different appliances that are already pre-built into the environment. So, for example, if you're using Fortinet hardware or Juniper or McAfee software or hardware, or for example the Microsoft Forefront Threat Management Gateway, kind of an old little thing, but still, you could be sending that log data into CloudAppSecurity. In the end, the goal, of course, of CloudAppSecurity is to get information on what applications our users are using and to help us, the IT organization, to identify possible threats to the environment, and we also want to be sure that our users and our data are safe when using these applications. So we can set up, for example, if we want to connect to a web app firewall from Barracuda, we can then set up the different types how we receive this data through FTP or secure FTP, or we might be using syslog connectors for getting these data. We can also check per data source to anonymize the private information. For example, we can store and display only encrypted usernames, and that of course is very informational or very important when you think about the GDPR. So there's also log collectors we could use, and basically this allows us to just connect to any resource where we get our data from, whenever it's just a log file format. So, different ways to get our data: application connectors for other applications or log collectors. And there's also conditional access app control as a source, where we can create the way that conditional access is going to get data into this Cloud App Security environment. Now, once Cloud App Security has received all its data and stored its data into Log Analytics, we can then start using the data that we have received. Now, as you can see, there's a general dashboard that shows the information about Cloud App Security, and it shows the most important information here. For example, you can see that there's 2 open alerts and there's 2 new alerts in the last month. That there is the severity of what is going on. In this case, the severity is medium. How many accounts have been monitored, how many files have been monitored, and how many activities have been monitored. You can see here some extra dashboards specific to an application. So for example, if I want a Microsoft Teams dashboard, you could see that my Teams environment doesn't have any alerts. But if I check Microsoft Azure here, it says there's 1 alert here, and that's that there's impossible travel activity that is done by this person called Alex de Jong, which is, by the way, me. There's also my SharePoint Online dashboard, and there's also a dashboard for specific risk types. So for example, if I want sharing control, then there's a dashboard for sharing control, but there's nothing else going on. But if there's threat detection, actually it shows that there is a medium level risk in my machine. So, and it will show what kind of things that happened towards the organization. In my case, there's a lot of zeros here, as you can see, because there's nothing bad really going on. If you click the View All Apps button, it will show all the dashboards for all the applications you could connect. And again, this is Office 365 and Azure. So the dashboards give us this general overview of what's going on. However, one of the goals of Cloud App Security is to identify what applications are being used by your users in your organization. Very often, users cannot name 15 or 20 applications they're using, but actually a user on average uses over 150 different applications. Many of those applications users are not even aware of. So what can we do with Cloud App Security to identify those applications? Well, first we could go and open up our Cloud Discovery dashboard. And this will show all the data that we have gathered by and actually this data is gathered from only one single user. And this one single user, again, which is me, has been using 239 applications from 25 different IP addresses. It's just one user and one machine, which is my laptop, but that is actually everything. You can actually, many of this information I've gotten through my laptop's Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection for Windows Defender. When installing Advanced Threat Protection for Windows Defender, you will be installing a sensor, and this sensor is sending all the data for everything that happens inside of the machine into this Cloud App Security environment. And if I scroll down a little bit, I can see that I have different types of applications I've been using. For example, I've been doing quite a bit of SharePoint, some Azure, some Skype for Business. I've been using Exchange, YouTube is here, LinkedIn is here, Teams and Google and Amazon. It's all kinds of applications, and you can see how much data has been shared over these applications. If I want to see more information about this, I can actually see the list for discovered applications here. And if I scroll this list, you can see that there's all kinds of applications that I've been using. These applications have been categorized. For example, if I want to see all my collaboration-based applications, I can see these applications here. This is the applications I've been using for collaboration. If I want to show sales applications, it shows all the applications that are related to sales. And you know what? I have to uncheck collaboration first because otherwise I would be selecting more than just one application or more than one category. As you can see, I've been using a couple of applications here, and you can see that these applications get a score. So Salesforce scores a 9, where Qualaroo scores a 4 when it comes to the security. Now, this is actually quite interesting because who makes up the score and where does it come from? If I would check, for example, Salesforce, it will open up information about that specific application. And you can see that it happened on a certain date. and I can see information about the application. And basically Microsoft has scored this application and it checked on all kinds of different categories. For example, general information about the app, security, compliance and legal. And within each category there's these subcategories, and it will show if there is any support for these kind of subcategory or not. For example, the remember password is not enabled, and therefore it actually shows what is going on. And the question is here, like, does this app enable the option for remembering and saving user passwords in the app? The possible value is yes, no, or not applicable. You can see that the answer would be no. You can actually suggest an improvement here to Microsoft. Says, hey, you know what, I'm actually saw that it's kind of different, so maybe you want to update the score of the application. Now, not only can we see information about the application, we can see who has been using the application, from what machine has this user been using this application, is there any alerts related to these applications, and, for example, from what IP addresses has this user been connecting to the application. And based on the information on the app, so based on the scores, this application gets a 9. However, you could also see that there was this other application that scored lower than a 9. For example, if I go back to sales here and then search for that same applications, you could see that the other application scores just a 4. If we open up this application, we can see that there's one user from one IP address, one machine has been working with this. And if we check the information about the application, you can see that many things are not being supported when it comes to compliance or legal. There's just a few security things that are going on. So therefore, this application will just get a 4. Now, with the discovered application list, you can then also go and find out the worst applications that your users could be using. So if I would be scrolling this all the way to, for example, a 3 or less, you could see there's quite a few applications that score very low when it comes to security. Now, the funny part is, I didn't even know that I was using these applications. But if you check many of these applications, this is what happens if you browse the internet. When you get data from many different locations, when you just browse the internet, that's what this is. So it's not that I'm actively using this, at least as a user I don't know, but because of CloudAppSecurity, I now at least have a clue of what's going on. And with that, that is a great help to identify where your possible threats are. Next to application information, we can also find discovered resources. So where did we get our resources from? In this case, I do not have any specific Azure components that I'm monitoring here, but it will actually show what objects from, for example, Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and the Google Cloud Platform are to be used and monitored. So we could, for example, see if there's blob storage that we use, or file storage, or queue or table storage, or maybe a custom application that we're running inside of Microsoft Azure, and we can actually see what information we have about those applications. Then there's the list of applications we have been using that we saw, all our users, and of course the machines that we have been using. We can actually open up a machine and then zoom into what that machine has been doing, not only when it comes to the amount of transactions or data, also, for example, how much uploads and downloads we have, and well, what applications have been using. And we can also view all the risky applications used by this user. Actually, that is everything with a value of 3 or lower. Now, next to getting the information of the applications that users are using, we can also go and investigate what's going on. Now, in the investigate area, we can go and show, for example, the activity log. And this shows everything that's going on within the environment. So wherever the data comes from, it's all gathered into one big database. And this big database is being viewed in different ways. Now, in this case, we have the investigation area where we have the activity log, where it shows many different things. For example, we could see that someone has been signing in, or we can run a command here, or we may have been moving stuff. We can actually see also information about if we did some searches or if we downloaded files, and all that information is being shown. Now this is all the activity, but we can also zoom in a little bit better. For example, there's a file view that shows, hey, what files have been used, when, and by who. So for example, I created this file here, which is 023.png. If I open up information about the file, we can see that this file has been saved, and it has been saved into this location. Now this location, the my.sharepoint.com, basically means OneDrive, and I have been storing this in a folder called Documents, Desktop, and then it's in my, and then we have this little folder here and the file. Other information we could get, for example, we have information about a PDF file here, which is also stored in a location in OneDrive. You can see the owner of the file, you can see what type of application or file this is. The file size is being shown, and if there's any classification labels applied to the file or policies. You can actually monitor the use of this information. So if you would be going into information protection and be using information protection analytics that can actually display information about who has been using what type of information protection classification label, then basically we're looking at data that comes directly from CloudAppSecurity, and it is stored all in that same location, which is your log analytics databases. We can also check information about users and accounts we are using and what these users have been doing. So for example, if I want to see information about Microsoft Intune, you can see that this is part of Office 365 and there's an identifier here and the affiliation is being used. We can also see other people that I have been connecting to, and there's many different things that that's going on here. For example, if I take let me just quickly go, for example, this email here. This is a general email from some hotel deal website. It shows where we have information about this email address. It's in Office 365, it's in Microsoft Exchange Online, last seen on February 13th, and it's external to our company. So this also has many information about what we're doing inside the organization. If you want to show only your administrators, you can check this checkbox for show admins only. And here we see that we have a couple of administrators here in the organization. Now I can then open up that specific user, and it has all kinds of information on what this user has. So not only do we get information about the external users or users that we collaborate with, it's just also your administrators here. Now when it comes to security configuration, now we can see that we have different areas where we can get this information from. One could be Azure, the other could be Amazon or regularity compliance. And in Azure you can see that we have quite a few information about what has been going on. So CloudAppSecurity shows more than just Microsoft 365. It also shows information from your Azure infrastructure as a service environment, as well as the platform as a service environment. You can see that this data shows about there's virtual machines that has disk encryption not enabled, or there's virtual machines that do not have an endpoint protection solution enabled, or there's an internet-facing virtual machine that should be protected with the network security group. Now, this information is typically not so much for the Microsoft 365 part of your Azure environment. This is where you will be building your infrastructure of platforms. And one of the nicer things here is that it says, hey, but you have something called the Azure Security Center. And I can go and follow that link, and this will open up in the Azure portal the Azure Security Center. Also here we have information about the environments that we are running, and this information comes straight from the CloudAppSecurity environment. Here we can see all the same kind of warnings that we have inside of CloudAppSecurity, but now it's shown into another view, which is the CloudAppSecurity environment. this is the Azure Security Center environment. So then when it comes to identity, we can also monitor how identities are being used, and for example, identity secure scores based on all this. And again, show our applications. We can also show our OAuth applications that we might be using inside our organization. So what connections do we have to applications using Azure Active Directory? And this data comes from another portal, which is azureactivedirectory.portal.azure.com, where we have the ability to connect our Azure Active Directory to other applications that are external to us. Now, this is the same list of applications that we can see from here. So investigations allow us to monitor what is going on inside the organization. It's CloudAppSecurity that gathers all this information and shows data from this central repository when it comes to your logging. So next to discovering and investigation, we could then go one step further, and that says, okay, so how can we control what is going on here? So what we can do is create policies, and as you can see, Microsoft already created quite a few policies, and there's many different ones. So for example, there is suspected golden ticket usage, or there is activity from suspicious IP addresses here, or there's multiple delete VM activities inside of Azure maybe. And some of these policies actually have alerts open. So as you can see, in my case, I have 3 alerts that has something to do with activities from infrequent countries. So if I would then open up this view, you can actually see the actual policy. And this is an anomaly detection policy. Again, this data, or maybe not again, but this data is being based on all the gathering of all these log files. And Microsoft is using machine learning and artificial intelligence in order to, well, get normal behavior in some kind of view. And then of course, if we know what normal behavior is, we then also know what abnormal behavior is, or anomalies. So this is the actual policy, and this policy allows us to tell what would be going on. And if, for example, something like infrequent country activities are going on, we can actually send alerts, for example, as an email or a text message, or you can also send alerts to Power Automate. That helps you to, for example, mitigate different connections, or disallow policies to be, or disallow activities to be used by certain users on certain locations. Also, it allows for governance actions. So we could, for example, suspend users for Azure Active Directory users if something like this happens. Or in Office, we can also suspend the user from accessing Office. So we could create a policy that says, hey, if a user is downloading more data than normal from the SharePoint pages, we can then suspend the user, because we are afraid that this user is trying to leech our servers in order to get to go away with our data. Now, this is just one of the examples of the policies we have, but there is so many different policies here. You can actually go, and there's a next page, and in the other page we could see, for example, impersonation activities, or multiple failed logon attempts. There's impossible travel activities. You can see that there's quite a few alerts on impossible travel activities. And you can then go and set up that policy again. So what is it looking for, which is the description, to who is this, for who is this user, the environment doing this. Do you want to analyze all the information here, and how sensitive is all this? And again, would you like to set up alerts, and also, for example, suspend users in order to block them from being hacked? Policies are based on templates. So there is many different templates that we can start off with for creating a policy. So for example, if I want to, if there's a template that is about potential ransomware activity, and from this location we can create a new policy. And with these building blocks, we can create different policies for different users within different organizations in our Azure environment. and that helps us identify all kinds of malicious actions. Now in the end, these policies, they will result into alerts. And as you can see, in my case, I have some alerts going on. Many things are about traveling. I have impossible travel activities and activity from infrequent countries. And this will then show where I've been working. So let's say I've been working in the United States, and then you could see that I have been moving messages to a deleted items folder when I was there, and the location was in New York. I was using my mobile device, which is running iOS, and I've been using Outlook. I can actually go and open up this message, and it says, hey, this is a check-in message for my flight to New York, for example, that I've been deleting. The user that was responsible for this is this user again, and that shows the information about what has happened at that time. Now, impossible travel activities is also quite nice. For example, it shows that I have been working in Norway, and then also I have been working in another country. Where did I travel from? From the Netherlands. I've been traveling between the Netherlands and Norway within 16 minutes. Now, there's many reasons that we can find for this. For example, I might have been using remote desktop services. And then, it seems that I would be traveling that fast, but actually I'm just, connecting remotely. However, still, it's important information to know what has been happening. So we can actually see what has happened. We have been signing in from Norway. We have been moving deleted messages in the Netherlands. So how was this possible? And this is something we might want to investigate. So these alerts also give us the opportunity to identify what is going on within the organization, who is doing it, where it's doing it, what application is the user using to do this, and this gives us a great deal of good information on how we can protect our data and, of course, users' identities by the applications that the users are using. Now we have seen most of all this. However, we're not done yet. There's also some extra settings we might find interesting when it comes to Cloud App Security. One of them is that integration with with conditional access application control. One of the cool things is that you can combine Cloud App Security and conditional access into one solution. So if I would go back to my Azure Active Directory, we can then go in and open up conditional access. Now, conditional access is used to specify or grant or deny access to online resources like Exchange or SharePoint or Teams or third-party applications like your financial application or, for example, SAP. And with with conditional access, we can basically define conditions, and we can allow or disallow a user to connect to these cloud applications based on those conditions. However, once we have the user accepted or blocked access to a certain environment, so for example, if I want all of my users to go into SharePoint Online, and I have all users, I select an application and I could set up a condition, we can then go, and if the user has been granted access, like this, we can then also set up the conditional access application control, where we could, for example, block downloads based on what the user is doing. So we could, for example, create a policy that says, hey, if a user wants to go and connect to SharePoint Online, you can do this from wherever you are in the world, because that is actually what Microsoft 365 is about. However, if you are not located inside one of our company's offices, then you are not allowed to download data from SharePoint. You can only use the data and view the data. So you can combine all kinds of different policies and conditions to one solution, where conditional access and Cloud App Security are working together in order to make that happen. Other settings is that we can go and set up the entire environment. For example, integration with advanced threat protection, or we might want to integrate with information protection, where we can say, hey, I want to enable file monitoring for information protection. I want to be connecting to Azure Information Protection in order to get that data as well. Conditional access application control, like the integration with conditional accesses here. Also, how do we work with this cloud discovery? For example, where do we get the data from? And we could, for example, also sanction an application or not. And we could choose, for example, to block sanction applications. And enabling this will block endpoint access to cloud application marked as unsanctioned in the CloudAppSecurity environment. So if we have an application, let's go back to my discovered applications, and I'm going to leave this page. We can see that we have quite a few applications. And if I check this view here, it says, hey, this application could be now tagged as unsanctioned. So I could say, hey, I don't want people to be able to use that application. So I had this one application that I noticed had a very low score when it comes to the risk, which was AccuWeather. So if I go here and say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna tag this application as unsanctioned. So it's now you get this little view here that says, okay, this is not cool. This application is not something you don't want to use. You can also tag it as sanctioned. And based on these settings, we can then go back to these default settings and to the default behavior. And we can then go and, for example, disallow these applications to be used whenever they are tried to be opened. So that is what we can do. Actually, this setting was right here. So we can now save this setting, and I want to automatically block any app that is marked as unsanctioned. Yes, so that's what I'm going to change here. Then, of course, you can also score metrics. So we could say, hey, you know what? How important is the information about the year in which the founder was founded? I don't think that is very important. So I can actually overrule how these scores are being created. So I'm gonna, for example, make this a little bit less important, and maybe where the company is located, that might be even more important. And you can basically go in and completely customize how the score of an application is being checked for. And maybe you live in a country where some of these components here are completely not important and therefore might not be relevant to you. Now, Microsoft says, okay, we have these default settings, but we can also overrule this. So all the different scores we have when it comes to the applications, like we just seen, like AccuWeather had a 3. Based on that, we can choose whatever we like to make more or less important. Also, we could create reports here, and these reports help us to view what is going on inside the organization. Basically, this is my default report here that I have been created. You can create other reports, like a global report, so what is going on with the global environment, in this case empty, or my Windows endpoint users could be shown here as well, and that shows us some information on what's going on. And finally, we can set up our mail settings. So what type of email do we get? And for example, do you also want to change the content of those emails, or maybe also allow exports of data? So you can basically what I've done here is I created my environment. I have set up everything that I want, and then I can basically export every configuration that I've done into a JSON file for later use, maybe import it at another location and do not have to make these changes all over again. Now, this is something that is not available throughout every place in Azure, but at least there is a way in order to get this data out. And that almost concludes everything we have. We can manage admin access, so who's allowed to connect into CloudAppSecurity. Of course, this could be quite some sensitive data. So you might not want just anyone just go into this environment by default. Therefore, you can set up who is able to access CloudAppSecurity. And in the scoped deployment, you can monitor all the activities by specific people. So you can include or exclude people specifically into CloudAppSecurity. And with security extensions, we can even go and connect our results or the data that we have inside of CloudAppSecurity to other locations. For example, in Azure, Microsoft has something called Azure Sentinel. And Azure Sentinel is a SIEM application, which is a security incident and event management application. And this is what we can then connect to and have this environment, the CloudAppSecurity data, could then be sent forward into yet another SIEM-based application. And with that, we are done with the demo on the environment of CloudAppSecurity. We have been looking into the different options of CloudAppSecurity. I've been checking the discovery panel, the investigation panel, and the control panel. Then also we have been checking where CloudAppSecurity could get its data from, and in the end also where CloudAppSecurity can send its own data into yet another application.